Korea Real Estate Explained, Episode 5, The Jeonse Loan Crisis. In 2022 and 2023, tens of thousands of Korean families lost their Jeonse deposits. In some cases, entire life savings, wiped out overnight. This wasn't just bad luck. It was the predictable result of a financing system that worked brilliantly in one interest rate environment and catastrophically in another. For most of the 2010s, the Bank of Korea kept interest rates near historic lows. Landlords discovered they could collect large Jeonse deposits, invest the cash at higher returns than their borrowing cost, and use those same deposits as down payments on the next property. It became a leveraged pyramid. The deposits of new tenants paid back the deposits of departing ones. As long as prices rose and rates stayed low, it worked. The system was fragile. Nobody wanted to admit it. Then came 2022. The Bank of Korea began hiking rates aggressively, from 1% to 3.5% in under 2 years. Borrowing against a Jeonse deposit now cost more than you could earn investing it. At the same time, property prices started falling. The combination was fatal. Landlords who had built large portfolios on deposit leverage suddenly couldn't return deposits when tenants moved out. The chain broke. The crisis also exposed a criminal playbook that had been running in parallel. Fraudsters had been deliberately exploiting Jeonse to steal deposits. The scheme was straightforward. Acquire distressed or cheap properties, often villas, using minimal cash. Set Jeonse deposits at or above the property's actual market value. Collect the deposits from desperate tenants in a hot market. Use each deposit to acquire more properties. Build a portfolio of 50 to 200 units. Then, when deposits come due, strip the assets, declare bankruptcy, and disappear. Tenants are left with a legal claim against an empty shell. Most victims recovered less than 50 cents on the dollar. Here's the critical question. Why were villas so much more vulnerable than apartments? The answer is pricing transparency. Korean apartments benefit from a clear price discovery system. The Korea Appraisal Board publishes KB size. Standardized price estimates updated regularly. All actual transactions are disclosed through the Ministry of Land's database. This means a bank, a tenant, or any buyer can look up what a specific apartment is worth. LTV controls work because the underlying value is knowable. Jeonse ratios are naturally bounded. When prices are transparent, landlords can't easily demand deposits that exceed real value. Villas operate in a completely different world. There is no KB size for most villas. Transactions are infrequent and comparable sales are scarce. LTV controls became effectively meaningless because the property value was unknown or easily manipulated. In hundreds of Incheon and Outer Seoul villa complexes, Jeonse deposits reached 90, 100, even 110% of the property's actual value. This is called gangtong Jeonse, literally an empty can Jeonse. The tenant believes they are holding a secured deposit. In reality, there is nothing backing it. The scale of the damage was staggering. Estimated losses exceeded 1.8 trillion won in unpaid Jeonse deposits. Over 40,000 households filed official complaints, and experts estimated the true number affected was 2 to 3 times higher. More than 2,000 criminal fraud cases were launched by prosecutors. And in hundreds of villa complexes across Incheon, Jeonse to price ratios exceeded 100%. Meaning tenants had handed over more cash than the entire building was worth. The government's response came in waves. First, mandatory deposit insurance. From 2023, all new Jeonse contracts above certain thresholds were required to be backed by deposit insurance from the Korea Housing Finance Corporation or the Housing and Urban Guarantee Corporation. Second, a 20 trillion won emergency buyout fund. The government directly purchased distressed Jeonse properties, allowing stranded tenants to remain in place while legal proceedings continued. Third, criminal prosecution at scale. The government treated organized Jeonse fraud as financial crime, not merely a civil dispute. Sentences of 5 to 15 years were handed down in landmark cases. The crisis revealed something fundamental about Jeonse that had always been true, but was easy to ignore when prices rose. Economically, a Jeonse deposit functions like an uninsured deposit at a small private bank. The landlord is the bank. The deposit is your savings. When the bank is a large, professionally managed institution, this works. When the bank is a leveraged private individual with no capital adequacy requirements, no regulatory oversight, and no deposit guarantee. The failure mode is exactly what Korea experienced. Korea had built a parallel banking system that housed millions of families, without banking regulation. The market aftermath played out over 2023 and 2024. Jeonse demand fell sharply. Tenants who could afford to switch to monthly rent did so, even at higher cash cost, to avoid deposit risk. Jeonse transaction volumes in 2023 fell more than 30% from peak levels. Landlords under pressure sold properties into a weakening market, pushing outer ring prices down further. By 2025 and into 2026, Jeonse volumes had partially recovered, but the risk premium on Jeonse, especially for villas, remained elevated. The stigma hasn't fully lifted. The full timeline: 2015 to 2021, low rates, leveraged landlord model spreads. January 2022, Bank of Korea begins hiking. Mid-2022, property prices peak and begin falling. Late 2022, first wave of Jeonse defaults. 2023, government response, insurance mandate, emergency fund, prosecutions. 2023 to 2024, Jeonse volumes fall sharply, WULS conversions accelerate. 2025 to 2026, partial recovery but structural fragility remains. For overseas investors and diaspora watching Korean real estate, 3 things to know. First, if you are considering a Jeonse arrangement as a tenant in Korea, verify deposit insurance. The mandatory insurance regime covers most mainstream contracts, but gaps remain in the villa segment. Do not hand over a large deposit without insurance confirmation. Second, Jeonse to price ratios above 60 to 65% are a warning signal in any property type. In villas, even 50% should prompt additional due diligence. Third, the post-crisis regulatory environment has made Jeonse meaningfully safer for mainstream apartment contracts. But the underlying structural fragility, a parallel banking system with no capital requirements, has not been solved. It has been patched. 3 things to take away from this episode. 1. The Jeonse crisis was not random. It was the predictable unwinding of a leverage cycle built on low interest rates, opaque pricing in the villa segment, and absent regulation of deposit risk. 2. The villa versus apartment divide matters. Pricing transparency is not just an academic concept. It is the difference between a deposit that has real security and one that is effectively unsecured. 3. Jeonse is repairing. Mandatory insurance, government intervention, and prosecutions have rebuilt some credibility. But the system's structural fragility remains. In the next episode, we look at how Korea taxes real estate. Korea Real Estate Explained. Episode 5, complete. Subscribe for more explainers on how Korean property actually works. No hype, just the market.